Rangers host the Los Angeles Knights tonight. New York is 3-7-1 this season, 8th place in the Metropolitan Division. Dave Maloney is the Rangers analyst on MSG and radio broadcast, and of course former player, and joins us here on Big Board Sports on 104.5 at Team ESPN Radio. Good morning, Dave. Roger Weiland, Chris Honorado on ESPN Radio in Albany.
Good morning, guys. How's everybody up in State Capitol?
Not bad. A ton of Ranger fans up here, I can tell you that, Dave, and they're all chomping at the bit to see if the Rangers can't get this thing turned around. What should we tell them?
Oh, boy. Well, it's certainly been a less than auspicious start, or an auspicious start, I think, for a team that had I think there was a sense that there was going to be some growing pains due to the change in personnel. But it's been a bit of a struggle here in a lot of areas of the ice that you find yourself kind of searching for one game that you can kind of hang your hat on and say, okay, this is what this team's all about. So you're, 12 games into the season, and it's been it's so inconsistent, particularly given the franchise that, by and large, was pretty consistent for a long time. So they have Vegas coming in tonight to the Garden tonight, and you're coming off a game where you dug a deep, deep hole and managed to rally against Montreal, but they couldn't find a way to get a win. So it's been a frustrating start.
How much trouble is the head coach in right now?
Well, I guess it's fair to think that that's where it's heading, or I'm not sure. I think it's unfair. I think it's obvious to think that if there's going to be a change made, where else do you look? But I'm not sure it's fair to bail after 12 games for a guy that, has done a pretty good job here. He's been one of the more winning coaches in the league in recent history, and so if it does continue on the track that it's started, that's probably where it's going to end up. But do I think that's fair? I don't think it's fair.
Rangers radio analyst Dave Maloney with us here on Big Board Sports 104.5, the Team ESPN Radio. And you can find Dave on Twitter as well, at Dave Maloney MSG. Dave, I've been kind of leaning on this idea that the Rangers may be lumped in with a number of other professional sports franchises that were ahead of schedule one year and then maybe held on to a core of players a little too long. Like if you go back, was it 3 or 4 years ago now when they reached the Stanley Cup final and everybody said, oh boy, we're not even supposed to be here this year. They played well against the Kings in that Stanley Cup final, and then everything felt like, well, it'll just fall into place for us over the next few years. That hasn't happened. Do you get that sense as you look at this roster and maybe what approach the organization has taken?
Well, it's interesting. It's always easy to debate hindsight, right? And really when you think they went to the Stanley Cup finals, then went to the conference finals and lost to Tampa. There were some trade deadline decisions made that thought that was going to be the missing piece, right? With Marty St. Louis, and they got to the finals then, and then it was Keith Yandel.
Yep.
Got to the conference finals, but you certainly mortgaged the future. It would be 5 years of no first-round draft picks, and that catches up to you. Now, when you go back to 2014, in hindsight, two of the key guys that would still be key players that were compromised as a result of the run were Anton Stralman and Carl Hagelin. Now, when you get better, you got to make decisions on who to pay and who not to pay. So that would be my only observation at that particular run. By and large, the core stayed the same, but you couldn't feed into a system that you need upper-end talent to compete. And if you go 5 years without a first-round draft pick, you have no chance at that kind of upper. Regardless if it's 20 or if it's a lottery pick, you need to stock the shelf. So I think, in hindsight, the run that this franchise made was on the shoulders. Their game breaker was their goaltender in Henrik Lundqvist. And you could match up opposing teams or winning teams and say that was the one position where you could say you had a game breaker. So the sum of the parts were oftentimes better. Now the sum of those parts have gotten a little bit older, and here you are at 3-7-2 5 years later.
How in your opinion, has Lundqvist played?
Inconsistent at best. I think what we saw last year, which was the first time in 11 years of his career, the peaks and valley of his game that we'd never saw before. Like when he was off marginally, and that didn't last very long. Last year it started to creep in where the drops were a little more significant, and it lasted just a little bit longer. And I think we're seeing a continuation of that this season. He'll be back in net tonight. He's had 4 or 5 days to kind of work with Benoit Allaire to get it back to just to the position where he makes the save when the save needs to be made. And there's always an old thing about that position. It's not so much the one that he saves. Any goaltender saves is the one that he lets in have a question mark around it. And there have been a few too many of those recently in Hendrick's game.
And I realize it may be too late here. Dave Maloney, by the way, youngest guy to ever serve as captain for the Rangers. Dave, I realize it may be too late here, but something just feels a little hollow. Lundqvist is one of the best that I've ever seen play the position. Mm-hmm. And it would, if he could have a Stanley Cup next to his name, obviously it wouldn't feel like as hollow when you try to tell people after he's retired how great he was.
You know what? I know that a lot of people can conclude or come to that conclusion, but let me tell you something. They have no shot of where they went without him. None. So to validate his career or be that crowning moment as Cup, I really don't think is fair. Because it certainly wasn't his play that they didn't win. They had a chance because of him. And unfortunately, there just wasn't enough beyond him to push you over that final limit. So you hear that about a lot of elite player or an elite player in every of the major sports that never wins despite his greatness. But let me tell you something. They had zero shot of winning without Henrik Lundqvist. And I think you're seeing that now, that when the goaltending isn't quite up to excellence, any team is going to struggle. And we haven't seen that for 10, 12 years here with Henrik Lundqvist.
Well, let's hope a win tonight. If you're a Ranger fan, right, get a victory. Sometimes it only takes that one win. Maybe Lundqvist, big night between the pipes, and
Vegas is
and
good.
You get on. Vegas is good. Vegas nights tonight, but sometimes one win is all it takes to get things turned around. But I totally agree with you, Dave. If it doesn't get turned around, you know the guy that's going to take the fall, and that's going to be the head coach, whether that's fair or not.
Yeah, well, and listen, every coach's shelf life is what it is, right? But I just don't think after 12 games we should be talking about that. But that's the way it goes now.
Dave Maloney, Rangers analyst, MSG radio broadcast. We appreciate everything you do here in the Capital Region, and we'll be back in touch with you down the road.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Dave.
Good work. We'll talk soon.